Hello! Today we will be looking at the story map and how it helps us when reading a book. This is a story map. Certain parts of stories are always there. These parts are called story structure elements. Using a story map like this, when listening to or reading stories, will help you focus on story elements and to understand and remember the story better. This box is the setting box. This is where you print the story setting. The setting of a story is when and where the story takes place. This box is where you print the names of the characters. Characters are the people, animals, or creatures in a story. This is the plot bracket. The plot tells what happened and gives the story a beginning, middle, and end. The bracket shows that the plot has 3 parts: a problem, a sequence of events, and an outcome. This box is where you put the character's problem. The main characters in a story always have a problem or something they need to do. The problem is usually presented at the beginning and continues through the middle of a story. This box is where you print the sequence of events. These are the things that happen as the character attempts to solve the problem. They usually happen in the middle of the story. And this box is where you print the outcome of the story, or how the story turns out. The outcome is almost always at the end of the story. This box is where you print the theme. The theme of a story is the message that the author wants the reader to take away from the story. It's the lesson or observation the story wants to teach. Identifying a theme is like digging for treasure. Solutions are not always discovered easily, but sometimes it is. After we read the story, we will learn more about identifying the theme. So we are going to be reading the story Once Upon a Dragon's Fire. Before we read, let me tell you a bit about the story. This story is about 2 kids named Freya and Silas. They live in a town with no fire, no heat, and a terrifying dragon. When a huge storm comes, Freya and Silas climb up the mountain to talk to the dragon. You are going to learn how to use the story structure questions to guide you in filling out the boxes on the story map. And these are the story structure questions. Together, we are going to read the story and fill in the story map. I will model asking the questions and filling in my story map, and you will record information on your own story map. Let's start by reading the title of the story. The title of the story is Once Upon a Dragon's Fire. So I'm going to take my story map and write that up here with the title. Right there. Okay. As we read the story, you will be looking for setting, characters, and plot. These story elements won't necessarily appear in order, so be on the lookout. Remember that the plot includes the problem, sequence of events, and the outcome. Okay, so now we're going to be looking at character. By looking at just the title of the book, we can see that the book will be about a dragon. So the dragon is one of the main characters. Using our story structure questions and looking at the character question, the question is, who is the story about? And the story is going to be about a dragon. So we are going to put the dragon's name into the character box. dragon. Perfect. Now we're going to start reading the book. And we're going to read the first 2 paragraphs. Once upon a magic kingdom, before fire ever existed, there lived a terrifying dragon near a village. No one had ever seen the dragon, but everyone talked about him. For it was written in books that he was so mean he ate kittens for breakfast. He was so scary he made children scream. And he was so evil he blew huge storms out of his jaws, which was why it was always so cold. Everyone was scared of the dragon. Okay, so now I think we have a bit of information about the dragon's problem. So looking at the story structure's questions, we're going to see what questions there are. Number 1 is, what is the problem the character faces? So what are some of the problems that the dragon faces in the book so far? Well, it looks like the villagers don't like him even though they don't know that much about him. So we can add this information to the story map. Okay, so now that we've got the problem in our problem box, then we're going to go on reading the text. And see if there's anything that we notice, okay? Everyone was scared of the dragon. Everyone except for Freya and Silas. They loved reading stories about the dragon out loud to each other. Okay, so it looks like here we have a few more characters introduced. So let's pull out our story map and our questions. And now we can add more of our characters into the character box. So the 2 children named Freya and Silas. And we'll also be adding the villagers to our characters as well. Okay, so now that we've got those characters added to our character box, then let's continue reading and see if you can hear any of the events that happen that help solve the problem. I'm not scared, Silas would say when Freya spoke of the dragon's roar, which was so loud it destroyed roofs. I'm not scared either, Freya would say when Silas read about the dragon's long, terrifying claws and sharp teeth. Reading about the dragon was their favorite thing to do. One bitter winter day, a big storm began to blow. It was so cold that all the warmth left the town and no one could bring it back. Okay, so it looks like we also have a problem for Freya and Silas. Where for Freya and Silas, there's a big storm where no one can bring back the warmth and they want to save the village. Now that we have that problem down in our chart as well, we're going to continue reading. This storm must be the dragon's fault, Silas said. Enough is enough, Freya declared. We have to do something. Both of them agreed. This bad dragon must be stopped. Okay, so now this part of the story begins to tell what happens as Freya and Silas try to solve their problem. Let's look at our question chart. And looking at the problem, what does the character want to do? So here we see that the characters are blaming the storm on the dragon and they want to stop him. So we're going to write down our first event. So on this, we have our first event being The big storm comes over the village and the villagers blame the dragon. Let's continue reading and listen for our second event. They packed some supplies and their books about dragons and set off up the high, windy mountain. So here we see that Freya and Silas decided to go up to the mountain and talk to the dragon. So let's write that as our event number 2. Okay, so now that we have that, we're going to continue reading and look for our next series of events. When they got to the top, they found a cave. 2 big yellow eyes shone out from the dark. "I'm not scared," Silas whispered. They stepped inside. And they saw the dragon. Okay, so what do Freya and Silas do? Well, they go into the cave and they find the dragon. So let's write that down as our next sequence of events. Okay, so now that we have that written, let's continue going and look for our next event. But he didn't have long, sharp claws. He didn't have terrifying teeth. And he didn't roar so loudly that roofs were destroyed. In fact, this dragon wasn't scary at all. He was very cold. He was just cold, scared, and very, very lonely. "We have to help him," said Freya. So now we see what is the next thing that they do? Well, they go in, they find the dragon, and they discover that he's not so scary, so they decide to help him. And we're gonna write that down as our next event. Okay, so now that we have that in our sequence of events, we're gonna continue reading and listen for our next event. Freya and Silas knew that when they felt sad or lonely, there was one thing that always made them feel better. So they snuggled close to the dragon and began to read. But then Okay, so now that we have that event in, we're going to continue reading and look for our next event. Freya and Silas knew that when they felt sad or lonely, there was one thing that always made them feel better. So they snuggled close to the dragon and began to read. Okay, so now we see that Freya and Silas decided to read to the dragon rather than get mad at him or fight him. So we're going to write that in our next sequence of events. Okay. But then Silas realized something terrible. Every story they knew said the dragon was evil. "But that's not true," said Silas. Then Freya had an idea. "What if we make up a new story?" she said. Okay, so now we see our next event. So rather than reading the dragon, the stories that they know, they decide to make up new stories about the dragon, where he's friendly and nice, just like as they've met him. So we're going to add this to our sequence of events as well. Okay, so far we have our sequence of events. We're going to keep on reading and see what else we get. Once upon a time, there lived a very wonderful dragon, Silas said. Everyone loved him because he was kind. He always reminded people to stick together and be good to one another, Freya continued. As Dragon listened to the new story, a warmth started to grow deep in his chest. The more Freya and Silas talked, the warmer and warmer he got, until... The warmth burst out of him in flames. It was the first time a dragon had ever breathed fire. Okay, so it looks like we definitely got an event this time. So now we're gonna, what Freya and Silas did, we're going to add to our sequence of events. They wrote a story that warmed the dragon up so much that he breathed fire for the first time. So we're going to add this to our sequence of events. So now that the dragon has breathed fire, let's see what happens next. Together, Dragon, Silas, and Freya flew down the mountain to protect the townspeople from the mighty storm. Dragon's fire warmed up all their houses, and they celebrated the three friends' bravery. Okay, so it looks like for our last event, what did they do? Well, Freya, Silas, and the dragon, using the dragon's new fire, went down to the village and warmed everyone up and stopped the storm. So let's write that down in our sequence of events. Okay, it looks like we're getting to the end of our book, so let's keep reading and find out. Ever since, dragons have carried fire inside to remind us of how friendship can warm hearts as well as homes. And in the village, there are new tales about dragons, full of kindness and adventure. For the people know that even in the coldest of times, we all carry the spark of friendship inside of us. So this paragraph tells the outcome of the story. Now, looking at our story structure questions, how does the story turn out? Does the character solve the problem? So let's answer the first question first. How does the story turn out? Well, it ends with the dragon being able to breathe fire and warming up the village. And now the dragon is friends with all of the villagers. So the dragon's issue is solved. Now, looking at Freya and Silas's problems, they wanted to stop the storm. And by becoming friends with the dragon breathed fire and warmed up the village, stopping the storm. So looking at the question, does the character solve the problem? The answer is yes. Both of the characters' problems get solved. So let's write that in our outcome box. Okay, so now that we have our outcomes box filled out, then we're actually going to go back to the beginning of the book and look at the setting. So looking at the first paragraph, once upon a magic kingdom before fire ever existed, there lived a terrifying dragon near a village. So if we look at our story structure questions for setting, the question is, where and when does the story take place? So from reading the book, we can see that the story takes place in a village inside of a magic kingdom. So we're going to write that in our settings box. Now our story map is completely filled out except for the theme. So we are going to work on filling out the theme now. Remember how I said that finding the theme is sometimes like digging for treasure? Now I'm going to show you how to identify the theme of the story by asking and answering 3 questions. So looking at our questions, number 1, was the outcome of the story good or bad? Explain why. I'm going to say that the outcome of this story was good because the dragon, Freya, and Silas all get their problem solved by the end, and they all end up being friends. And the dragon gets welcomed in by the villagers, and the village is no longer cold. So I would say that's a pretty good ending. Now looking at the next question, what lesson does the main character or characters learn? And for this, we'll be using the sentence structure. The main character learned that he, she, or they should or shouldn't blank. So the sentence that I came up with was, the main character learned that they shouldn't judge someone or something they don't know and should welcome in others. Now we'll be looking at our last question. What lesson did you learn from the story? With the sentence structure, we should or shouldn't blank. So looking at that sentence structure, this tells me that we shouldn't judge someone without getting to know them first. So with all three of those questions answered, we know that this story teaches us a lesson about judging others. Someone who judges others ends up being wrong about them most times, just like the villagers were about the dragon. So the theme of this story is to not judge others. So let's write that in our box about theme. And then we have our whole story map filled and a better understanding of the story. Now that we've identified the theme and filled out our story map, I would like you to think of other stories or other real-life experiences where you can see the same thing. Thinking about how the theme applies to other situations can help you to better understand and remember the theme of the story.